In the 1970s, a simple farmer found himself swept away on a journey that would change his life. As the events surrounding him grew stranger and stranger, he continued to stand by the authenticity of his experiences. Experiences where he became the designated ambassador between human beings and something grotesque from beyond the stars. And get this, folks, a lot of it is tied to a very specific national park. You won't want to miss this one. What's bizarre, interesting, and disturbing is how the national parks come into play with this, but I'll save that for the plot twist later on in the story. For now, we need to go back to the very beginning. Yoshihiro Fujiwara was a vegetable farmer who worked the land around Kitami, a city on Hokkaido Island in Japan. In 1974, he was already 28 years old, but he had already experienced more back-breaking work on his isolated farm than most of us will complete in a lifetime. Year after year, he spent his days working in the sun, waiting for the rain, and patiently tending his crops until the harvest. Meaning that, when it was time to sleep, Yoshihiro needed every minute he could get. So it only made him even more irritated when, early in the morning of April 6th, he heard a loud bang on his front door. It was 3 in the morning. Normally, Yoshihiro would have been sound asleep at this time. Remember, he's a farmer, so this is only a few hours before his day starts. But he had already been woken up a few minutes earlier. Basically, his guard dog outside his open bedroom window had just started going wild for no apparent reason, barking and growling at something on the property. At first, Yoshihiro had been willing to write it off as the dog being jumpy. If anything, it was probably just some wildlife pacing the perimeter. But now, sitting in his bed wide awake, listening to the heavy knocks coming from the front of the house, Yoshihiro was not so sure. And so Yoshi realizes that whatever is happening, it's not just going to go away. Maybe someone needs some help. So he rubs the sleep out of his eyes and he kind of shuffles over to the front door. And before grabbing the doorknob, he slips on a pair of shoes just in case he has to step outside. And as he turns the knob, he notices something. His dog is no longer barking or growling. Instead, it just is making this long, sad howl. Yoshihiro didn't realize it at the time, but it was probably a warning. And as he opens the door, he could have never guessed what was standing on the other side. The moment the door swung open, a bunch of these things that Yoshihiro was feeling, exhaustion, irritation, confusion, they all vanish instantly. He only feels one thing now: absolute, total fear. The first thing that Yoshihiro notices is just a view of his yard, and it takes him a moment to realize that it is because his visitor is extremely short. Slowly, he allows his eyes to drift downward and can't believe how long it takes to reach his visitor's face, and in short, he has to look about 3 feet above his doorstep before he finally gets a good look at who is knocking. Well, the head, it turns out, isn't human. It's too large and bulbous, almost like the body of an octopus. A pair of eyes slope downward on either side of what looks like a single nostril in the shape of the letter V. Both the eyes and the wide mouth convey a sinister expression as it looks up at him. Now, whatever this thing is, it has something in mind for Yoshihiro. And now he instinctively takes half a step back, giving him a better look at this thing. It seems to have some sort of blue cone-shaped helmet on top of its head, and some kind of disc. From this oval-shaped disc come sparks of electricity that ripple down the thing's body before dissipating. As this miniature lightning plays across his visitor's body, he's able to make out the rest of its appearance from the flash that it throws off. He would later describe what it wore as a one-piece suit of transparent vinyl all over its torso, which is more like a central hub than a human midsection. While it stands on 2 legs, it doesn't resemble a human being at all. No, in fact, it seems more like a starfish or even an octopus, although instead of having 8 limbs, it only has 4. 2 of these make contact with the ground, ending in strange nubs or shoes. The other two appendages sprout from its torso and are apparently serving the purpose of arms. It's a terrifying sight, but easily the worst thing about the monster on Yoshihiro's doorstep is its skin. The thing looks absolutely putrid, like it's somehow diseased. The skin is brown and bumpy like a toad's, but here's the thing. Unlike a toad's skin, the skin of this thing is covered in a layer of slime that gleams in the moonlight, all across the surface of its body, what can only be described as a mixture of yellow and blue scabs or lesions. And so, having finally convinced himself that his eyes aren't playing a trick on him, Yoshihiro finally realizes it's time to take shelter inside. Now, before he can move, this thing raises one of its tentacles up towards the sky, and immediately, like flicking on a light switch, this beam of orange energy pours down from above. It's orange and hot, like standing underneath a heat lamp. Yoshihiro is thinking that this has become a life or death situation. He stumbles back into his house, slams the front door, and runs back to his bedroom. And somehow he finds the courage to look through his window, which is still opened, and after his eyes adjust to the darkness, he sees something he can't believe. He sees something suspended in the air over one of his fields. It's this enormous disc, about 5 feet thick and 26 feet in diameter, just floating there about 70 feet above the ground. He realizes that this is the source of the weird orange light that flooded his property just moments ago. And now, Yoshihiro is just watching this thing, and he allows himself a moment to relax. He's inside now and he's safe, and if this weird thing steps to the window, well, he could just slam it shut. But this feeling of safety doesn't remain long. Remember, Yoshihiro was asleep, so he's wearing his pajamas. That means that he could easily feel what happens next. All of a sudden, a hot gust of air coils around his ankle, and it instantly sweeps him off his feet. Yoshihiro braces for when his body hits the floor, but it doesn't. Instead, he finds himself floating midair, suspended by the weird orange light that's cascading through the window. And then he starts to move. Some invisible force in the light is dragging him through the opening. He tries to grab the windowsill on his way out, but it's no use. The pull is too strong. One by one, he feels his fingers losing their grip, and the next thing he knows, he's out in the yard, caught helplessly in the grasp of the orange light, the tractor beam, and in the midst of his complete and total panic, he remembered one thing that could have completely saved him from all of this. The one thing, folks, that kept him vulnerable. You see, aliens can't stand the sight of healthy, high-quality meals like the ones Factor delivers. With over 35 chef-crafted, dietitian-approved options to choose from each week, including keto, calorie smart, and vegan and veggie meals, Factor's ready-to-eat dishes are like kryptonite to extraterrestrial and interdimensional invaders. If only Yoshihiro had taken a break from his back-breaking farm work to enjoy a gourmet Factor meal featuring premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, or truffle butter, he could have had a delicious, stress-free dinner ready in just 2 minutes without any prep work or cleanup. But most importantly, these beings would have taken one look at his sustainable, nutritious meal and fled back to their flying saucer in disgust. Unfortunately, Yoshihiro had let his Factor subscription lapse, and now, as he's dangling there helplessly in the orange light, he couldn't help but think that a Factor breakfast or snack would have given him the defense he needed to ward off these intergalactic intruders. Now, as this beam pulled him closer to the hovering disc, he made a solemn vow. If he somehow survived this close encounter, he'd never skip his Factor order again. I mean, after all, with flexible plans ranging from 4 to 18 meals per week, there was no excuse not to have a fridge full of delicious, alien-repelling meals at all times. If you don't want to be like Yoshihiro and actually have a defense against these interdimensional beings, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code WhatLurksBeneath50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code WhatLurksBeneath50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. And now, Yoshihiro's mind is racing. All he knows is that he is traveling above the ground. slowly at first, then faster and faster, all in the direction of the UFO hovering above his field. Any second now, he's going to collide with the side of this vehicle, and he knows that the impact is bound to shatter his bones. But then, just at the exact moment he's about to smack against the side of this metallic saucer, something bizarre happens. He doesn't hit the side of it. No, he actually was absorbed through the outer wall into a completely new space. Basically, he has been teleported inside the ship at an instant. And so he's blinking his eyes, trying to take stock of his new environment. Everything looks weird and off kilter. And at first, he thinks that he's just disoriented. And that's when he realizes it isn't his eyes playing tricks on him. The inside of the craft is actually a parallelepiped. Now, for those of you who aren't geometry nerds, Paralellopiped is a three-dimensional space created by 6 parallelograms. Imagine taking the top and the bottom of a cube and pushing them in opposite directions so that all the surfaces are like lopsided diamonds. What you wind up with is a slanted prism. Now, besides its unusual shape, the interior of the saucer is colored bright blue. Things resembling air vents and oddly oriented lamps sprout from the walls here and there, and on one surface is a sign with a foreign but vaguely familiar writing on it. Yoshihiro later said that it almost resembled Japanese but wasn't legible at all. Well, the first clue that he is not alone in this room comes from his nose. There's an odor so strongly that fills the interior it makes him feel like he's about to retch, and when he looks around, he sees 2 creatures just like the one who knocked on his front door stepping into view. They were short before, but now, lying on his back on the floor, these starfish octopus humanoids felt much taller. And then he tried to get up, but before he could, his 2 kidnappers pin him to the floor, and he realizes how strong they are for such little things. And then they stare at him, and he starts to calm down, and he hears this voice, not from their mouths, but from inside his own head. And it's a voice that says,
"No danger. We promise to release you close to your house."
Clearly this was meant to make him feel safer, but it had the opposite effect. Instead of relaxing, he felt himself immediately go into fight or flight mode, and so he pushes against these things with all of his might, and when he kind of stumbles to his feet, he looks and he spots an exit on the opposite wall. It's a sort of hatch or entryway standing halfway open, and so he rushes towards it as fast as he can, and he dives headfirst right through the opening, and he instantly falls. Boom! Now at first, he's in a daze, and he wonders how he could have fallen so far and still be alive, but he realizes that the ship he just escaped from has adjusted its distance from the ground. And luckily for him, it wasn't hovering much more than 10 feet. Now, 10 feet is still no joke, and it had the wind knocked out of him. And all he wanted to do was just lay there and recover, but he knew he couldn't. They already took him once, and with this craft right above his head, it wouldn't take much for them to just snatch him up right again. So he gets up and he starts running and running until he can no longer see the light cast from this thing in front of him. And as the orange glow gives way to the blue-black shadows of the night, he found himself all alone on a stretch of road. Why didn't this thing follow him? We don't know. And so up ahead, he sees a house. And now, Yoshihiro is running as fast as he can towards this house, and he skids to a stop at the front door, and he's banging as hard as he can, "Let me in, let me in." Obviously, he'd be speaking Japanese. And so when the owners open the door, they instantly recognize him as the young farmer who lives about 2 miles down the road. Now, normally, the owners would have turned away such an early visitor, but they can clearly see from the expression on his face how frightened he is. And so they bring him inside, and he starts to tell them what happened just a few minutes ago. Until, that is, Yoshihiro notices the clock on the wall. That's odd. It's just a few minutes after 3 a.m. No, it's 4:30 in the morning, meaning that somehow an hour and a half have passed in what felt like just a few minutes. Well, thinking that's weird, Yoshihiro eventually feels safe enough to return home, and when he gets there, he forgets about getting up early to farm. After this, he doesn't sleep much, and instead, he just lies in bed thinking about what has just happened to him. Normally, Yoshihiro would have spent the following day working, like normal. I mean, it was spring and there was plenty to do around the farm, but he couldn't find the motivation to do any work. He kept wondering about what had happened to him and worrying about whether or not it would happen again. And as it turns out, Yoshihiro had every reason to worry, because not even 24 hours had passed before the next weird thing happened. That following evening, Yoshihiro said that he was minding his own business when a burst of pain filled his ears. It felt like his eardrums might burst. And not long after that, Yoshihiro noticed a strange sensation start to manifest at the tip of each finger. Soon it felt like each fingertip was on fire, and at the same time, he was filled with an overwhelming impulse to write. Write what? Well, he didn't know. All he knew was that he needed to write. So, Yoshihiro grabbed some paper and a pencil and sat down, not even thinking, just letting his hands do all the work. Well, folks, when he finally glanced down to see what he had produced, he was absolutely astonished. There, staring back at him, were a series of strange symbols. Without consciously realizing it, Yoshihiro had traced a number of nonsensical shapes, and he hears a loud voice echo through his head. And it says, "When the disc lands on the mountain, you will come and board by yourself." What would you have done in that situation? What happened to Yoshihiro on the morning of April 6th, 1974? Because it sounds absolutely terrifying. I'm not sure if I would have accepted the invitation, but for whatever reason, he couldn't help himself. He just felt drawn back. Maybe there was something else at play, like mind control. Either way, he said that the next day on April 8th, he and a pair of friends headed out to a nearby Nikoro mountain. And when they reached its base, around 6:30 in the evening, Yoshihiro said goodbye to his friends and began the long, lonely walk all the way up to the peak. And the entire time, he felt pushed and pulled as if some being urged to stay on some visible designated path. Now finally, he reached the area where his new acquaintances wanted him to go. He saw the disc glowing orange just above the peak of Nikoro Mountain, waiting for him silently. Last night it had terrified him, and now he found himself approaching the UFO completely of his own free will. Or at least, that's how it seemed at the time. Well, whether voluntarily or manipulated to do so, Yoshihiro found himself back aboard the craft. The short starfish creatures were there to greet him. And then, nothing. The next thing Yoshihiro knew was that he was lying on the ground, his friends trying to help him regain consciousness, and he never disclosed much about exactly what happened on this second visit, beyond a few vague details. All he ever said was that he had been taken into outer space where his kidnappers, or his new friends, depending on your interpretation, took him on a set of journeys, once around the moon and twice around the Earth. He never shared what he and the creatures talked about, if anything. But here's where his story gets even stranger. You see, he spent the next few days bedridden, trying to recover from the immense physical and mental strain of his second encounter. He didn't work in the fields and didn't leave his house much. But Yoshihiro started to realize something. He had changed, folks. He said that the days following his second trip aboard the UFO left him with what can only be described as psychic powers. Now, the starfish people could easily communicate with him throughout the day, telepathically beaming messages into his head, and he also claimed that he had developed a talent for telekinesis, bending metal objects like spoons simply by using the power of his mind. Well, several days passed, and he had fallen deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, wondering who he's become and what it all means. On April 13th, 1974, the beings contact him again, and they are to take him on one final journey. According to Yoshihiro, he found himself once again aboard the aliens' spaceship, and this time, their trip took them even further from Earth. In fact, Yoshi swore that the UFO flew at unfathomable speed all the way past the moon, past Mars, all the way to Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system. Here, they entered orbit and made preparations to land on Titan, one of Jupiter's moons. Look, this story is getting wilder and wilder by the minute, and we've heard it all before, to one degree or another. The UFO contactees of the 1950s and 60s often claimed to visit other planets in the company of beings referred to as space brothers. With the benefit of what we know in 2024, these old stories sound like absolute fantasy. The contactees regularly hopped out of spaceships to spend time in places like Venus or Mars without any protective gear on in these harsh environments, entertained by entire civilizations that we now know simply don't exist. But here's the thing about his story. Unlike the earlier contactees, he didn't get out of the UFO when it landed on Titan. He stayed aboard the ship. It's a tiny detail, but one that lends his experience just a little bit more credibility than we're used to seeing in these types of stories. Well, as it turns out, while he didn't disembark on Jupiter's moon, one of the aliens did. And that alien brought a souvenir back for Yoshihiro, a rock from Titan's surface. Now remember, this is 1974. A probe from Earth wouldn't land on Titan for over another 30 years. If true, this was the first time anything from Earth, let alone a human being, had been anywhere near this place. And here's the other thing about this rock. Yoshihiro was allowed to keep it, meaning that it had the potential to vindicate him and all of his stories, which by now had become the talk of his neighborhood. Unlike some people who claim extraterrestrial contact, Yoshihiro was excited to share this evidence with officials. He promptly handed the rock from Titan over to researchers at the University of Studies of Engineering of Gatami, as well as a team from Japan's CBA International. And folks, this doesn't play out like a movie where, they analyze the rock and they find out that it's got all this hidden alien DNA, and so they quarantine Yoshihiro and the whole world goes on lockdown. No, it didn't happen at all like that. It was subjected to laboratory experiments to determine its origin, but you guys probably know how the story goes. Bad news for Yoshihiro. The September issue of Caveat Emptor, a UFO magazine, published the following in an update on Yoshihiro's evidence. Japan's CBA International, which was investigating this incident, claimed that the rock was actually some limestone from a nearby quarry. The organization concluded that the whole incident was false. Ouch. Now, clearly, this wasn't what Yoshihiro claimed it was. The findings from the university were similar as well, and in short, they suspected that the rock from Titan was nothing more than a stalactite broken off in a cave somewhere near Katami. This isn't the end of Yoshihiro's story, though. We'll talk about what happened to him in just a minute. But let's take a minute to figure out what's going on here. Needless to say, the laboratory analysis represented a serious blow to Yoshihiro's credibility. And is that all we're dealing with here? Just another hoaxer in a long line of liars and hucksters in the field of flying saucers? Maybe, maybe not. Because as it turns out, there is evidence to suggest otherwise. Even if Yoshihiro's trip to Titan wasn't genuine, other people saw something strange in the skies above Katami on the night of his initial kidnapping. Renowned Japanese researcher Kenichi Arai collected a report from April 6, 1974 that seems to corroborate a UFO presence in the area that night. You see, he spoke to a young girl, junior high school student Miyuki Fujita. Miyuki didn't live far from where Yoshihiro lived and stepped forward to share her own sighting that night, independent from the growing media sensation around Yoshihiro's experience. Miyuki claimed that she had been sleeping that night when something bright sent light through her bedroom window. Although she didn't get a good look at the source, she was amazed by how much brighter it was than the usual amount of moonlight that she saw each night. Here's something else to consider. Hokkaido has had tons of UFO activity over the years. And February 2nd of 1958, Yasukichi Nakaguchi, who just like Yoshihiro was a farmer, reported seeing an odd craft come down from the sky and land on the island. Yasukichi's sighting had two other witnesses, his own son and neighbor, Kamataro Takuma. The UFO appeared around 3:30 in the afternoon, before it vanished beyond some nearby hills. All three of them were able to get good enough looks to describe the object, which was shaped like an egg. Another sighting from the early 1980s included photographic evidence. In the October 1985 issue of Flying Saucer Review, a researcher by the name of Hachiro Kubata wrote about how on May 9, 1982, at Hasakawa in Hokkaido, a 17-year-old high school student named Yoriaki Suda, a keen member of his school photography club, stepped out of his home at about 1:30 in the afternoon and observed a black UFO moving slowly through the sky. Immediately, he snapped it with his Canon camera using a 35 to 70 millimeter zoom lens. The picture is claimed to show a domed craft with 4 portholes. Here's something interesting though. The history of Hokkaido and UFOs actually stretches back not just years but centuries. One of the oldest references to strange things seen in the sky above the island comes all the way from 1707 when, on October 28th, a large glowing white orb manifested in conjunction with a tsunami. This occurred near the town of Hidaka, and as it turns out, Yoshihiro's story ends in Hidaka as well. You see, just because Yoshihiro never claimed to go on any other trips with his starfish buddies, that doesn't mean his story was over. In fact, he claimed to have ongoing contact with the beings at distance through telepathic communication. Eventually, he learned what the plan had been for him all along: to become a spokesperson for planet Earth. The aliens informed Yoshihiro that he was now a representative of an intergalactic organization known as Summon Call Space Union, or SAMCALL, as it was abbreviated. Basically, Yoshihiro had been designated an ambassador for this organization and the human race. This was why he had been contacted in the first place, and why he had been granted so many special powers. Beyond simple psychic abilities like telepathy and telekinesis, Yoshihiro claimed that he also inherited a talent for teleportation. In fact, as years went on, he claimed to have averted numerous natural disasters, not just on Earth, but on other planets as well. What, is this guy teleporting to different galaxies now? In fact, he would go on to talk about how he could teleport to a star that was 250 million light years away in 6 minutes, and that his role is delaying the natural disasters, such as earthquakes and eruptions, in addition to teleporting across the galaxy. Yoshihiro also claimed that he had access to alternative modes of transportation, and would go on to explain that he had 3 UFOs for activities. Yes, you are hearing that correctly. Yoshihiro claimed that he had maintained a secret flying saucer hangar in the Hidaka Mountains, a range that spans the length of the Hidaka Sanmyuku Erimo Quasi National Park. From this entry point in one of Japan's largest national parks, Yoshihiro said that he was able to descend through the inner crust of the earth, and this route allowed him to travel throughout the hollow earth, where he went from volcano to volcano, preventing future catastrophes. Yoshihiro said that he used his UFOs to move rocks and delay cataclysmic eruptions, essentially saving countless lives. That's pretty much all we know. After the rock from Titan was proven a fake, Yoshihiro kind of just faded into obscurity. If he's alive today, he'd be 78. But tracking him down just seems really difficult, so let's just tell ourselves that he's still out there, saving the world from future volcanic eruptions. Look, it all sounds so far-fetched, so what are we dealing with exactly? Was Yoshihiro just another crazy person? Was he just another guy that claimed to see Jesus in his pancake syrup? Does the analysis of his moon rock prove this? Or do you think that the long history of UFO sightings in Hokkaido makes his story just a little bit more believable? Or maybe, just maybe, do you think that something legitimate happened to him originally, but the later encounters were faked? I would love to know what you think, so please leave a comment down below. And since we're talking about commenting down below, since you guys made it this far into the video, I want you to go ahead and leave this comment down below: starfish people. So that way I know who made it to the very end of the episode and, well, who didn't. And if you guys enjoy stories like this, where we go into the storytelling of strange, mysterious, supernatural cases, go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. As always, folks, always remember, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next episode.